Hey everybody, Tyson Mutrux here with Josh Satterlee. Satterlee, is that what we're going with?
That'd be nice, but I know that you like to say it differently just because you like being different.
Joshua Satterlee, chiropractor in Nevada. Although I think you kind of bounce all over the place. But we're going to talk today about why it's important to get checked out after a car crash, even if you feel fine. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell some horror stories that I've had. But Josh, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Tyson. It's a pleasure to be here, and I hope this is worthwhile for everyone out there. And is it okay if I call you Tyson Mutrux?
Mutrux, you absolutely. I mean, listen, some of the Mutruxes say Mutrux. We say Mutrux, but Amy and I have talked about, hey, maybe we should change it to Mutrux. It's actually the original way of saying it. So maybe the right way. But
I always say, like, if somebody writes their name as a first initial period and then middle name and then their last name, that means they're very wealthy. Like, you know, J. Tyson Mutrux, that means either you're a published author or you're incredibly wealthy.
I'm going to tell, before we talk some more about you, I want to tell a funny story about me. So I now have to put on all my pleadings R. Tyson Mutrux, which drives me nuts. My first name is Ross, but I used to always put Tyson Mutrux, but then Illinois started kicking back all of my pleadings. They said, well, you're not licensed in the state of Illinois. I said, yes, I am. What are you talking about? Well, Tyson Mutrux isn't listed. I said, well, it's Ross Tyson. And so now from now on, I just put R. Tyson Mutrux because it saves me some headaches down the road.
Interesting. I was just making that up. Yeah.
No, it's that's why I actually have to do it. It sucks. But tell us about your background, though. I know I mentioned you're a chiropractor, but talk about your background a little bit.
Yeah. So when I was in college, I studied what's called biomechanics, which is kind of like understanding the forces that allow human beings to move or perform athletic feats. And what we studied actually in college was the forces required to do a axle or a double axle in figure skating. And so, you know, they have to push off on the ice hard. You have to change the forces from sideways skating to basically jumping vertically. And then once you land, if you don't change them back from downward to out, you fall on your butt. So it really made me interested in kind of how the human body performs. After that, I was also working in the training room, like working on the college athletes. I got kind of frustrated with what you could do. Like, you're kind of limited there. So I decided to go to chiropractic college because I thought that was the best mix of, like, what can you do now for somebody and put your hands on, you know, move this joint, stretch that muscle, teach them rehab. To me, it's amazing that we can do a bunch of change right now with somebody in our office. You know, I know you know about the medical industry, but a lot of times the best answer is, oh, I'm going to refer you out for a test. We'll see you in 3 weeks. We'll come back. And I want to do something right now. Like, I want to see if I can change it. So I went to chiropractic college, and then after that, kind of wanted to specialize in more of did a lot of work in sports. And so kind of started studying different courses that have to do with the evaluation of athletes, and which is exciting. But, you know, athletes are just taking the abilities of everybody and just expressing them at a very high level. So, you know, you and I can run, but we can't run as fast as Usain Bolt. I know you're close, you know, just a second behind him, but yeah. But it's not like you have Usain Bolt has a different hip or a different knee. You know, he's just polished it incredibly well. And so that goes all the way down to, like, understanding the bones, ligaments, tendons, all the structures of the body. We can use them at the highest level to swing a golf club or hit a home run in baseball, run a 100-meter sprint like Usain Bolt, or we use them every day to get, you know, pick up the laundry basket. And so what's interesting to me is, number one, sometimes why we hurt. And then that's usually, if we kind of followed a spectrum, pain is on one side, and then Usain Bolt's sprinting abilities on the other. And if we can slice into thin slices, we can get people out of pain and then get them performing better. So I do a lot of training around that. I teach nationally other chiropractors and physical therapists about the processes. And I really love the diagnostic side of things, because if we ask really good questions and get down to, like, what you might seem like the nitty gritty, we can understand what's going on. And I think that's the first step in really providing good care.
That's pretty cool. Pretty cool perspective too. Since you've become licensed as a chiropractor, is there anything that surprised you about the practice?
Yeah, there's quite a bit. I would say, from the perspective of a patient, you know, one thing I didn't ask this early on, but and I'm sure that you had a similar experience in your profession, but about 4 years in, somebody brought up the point like, hey, it really doesn't matter what you do. Why don't you ask the client or the patient like what their goal is? Like, what is their goal out of this? And I always thought like it was to get out of pain, right? I mean, you just think, oh, I come in with back pain, I want to get out of pain and leave. But I started asking that question like, Tyson, what is your goal? What can I help you achieve? And I was really surprised at how a lot of people talked about pain, but maybe only about a third of them, maybe 40%. It wasn't more than half, certainly wasn't more than half. And a lot of people say like, I want to be able to do blank again. Or I used to ride my bike for an hour a day. I want to be able to do that again. Or I want to throw, I remember one guy sticks out in my mind. I want to be able to pitch Little League baseball to my son without hurting. And I was like, but you were in a car crash. It's like, I know that, but that's the thing I want to get back to. And, he's complaining of back pain and stuff, but he just Little League was his thing. It was the thing he did with his son. It was very rewarding. He had been divorced. So this was his time to spend time with his son. And he said, after I throw Little League, or throw some batting practice, I'm on the couch for the next 3 hours. I can't move, my back's hurting. And I was just struck by that. Never mentioned the word pain, really. Just, I want that ability. So that kind of surprised me. And then the other thing that surprised me, unfortunately, is like, I love peeling this onion away and finding out what's going on with people. And it just surprised me there's people in my profession, and I'm sure in yours, that really just want to be technicians, just do the crack and pop and send people off and don't want to understand anything or want to go deeper. And I'm sure it's the same in law, right? Like there's some people that just, hey, I just want to process the paperwork and I don't even need to meet the client. I'm like, how could you live? That seems boring.
Yeah, we have these really detailed questionnaires that sometimes leaves clients crying, and they're really, really powerful because we get all this extra detailed information that we can use in our demands. They give us really, really good results. It's really kind of interesting that I talked to other lawyers and they're like, well, I don't really do that. Can you send me that questionnaire? And I'm happy to do it because it really is a helpful tool. And those little things that really, honestly, 90 minutes of your time is not that much in the grand scheme of a case. And it's really, really helpful. But so, yeah, it's that little bit of extra effort. And it's funny you're talking about those, like the things that kind of surprised you. And we had this thing. I read the survey once, and I've asked clients for several years now as to what they want out of an injury case. And the number one thing is always they want treatment, right? So I can't provide that, right? But they want the treatment. But I know the best lawyers in the state, right? Or not lawyers. I know the best lawyers, but also I know the best doctors in the state and in the area. So we get them treatment. Number two is they want to get their medical bills paid, but in a distant three. I'm talking like way down, way down. Number three is they want to get some money in their pocket. But and whenever I went into law school, I had a different thought. I was thinking like, injury lawyers are just ambulance chasers. It's just about money and all. Like it's not. Right. Not. I mean, it's completely changed just the way I view things, and it really is kind of incredible. We go into these professions thinking one thing, and it's different. That's why I asked that question, because it is. Yeah. I was curious to see from your perspective how it was different from whenever you first went in.
It's funny because I haven't been to the dentist for like 20 years, and I made my wife a promise this was the year I was going to go. So I went, and the guy's like, hey, actually your teeth look great, except there's just one place where you have this like dental decay. And he said, and I'm sure you want to get that cavity filled. And I was like, actually on my list of things I want in life, getting a cavity filled has got to be very close to the bottom. I mean, honestly, but what do I not want? I don't want, I want to be able to chew food. I don't want pain in my mouth. But the way he phrased it, I was just laughing inside. Like that is the person doing the work thinking this is what everybody wants, right? Is a cavity fill. I'm like, no, in fact, I want no part of that. I mean, I don't want cavities, but if given the choice, do you want to go have, grab a burger with Tyson and talk about sports or get a cavity filled? I'm going to choose the burger with Tyson light years ahead of the cavity filling.
No question. All right. So let me get into my questions, because I want to do this topic about, getting checked out, even if you feel fine. And obviously if it's a situation where the person in a car crash, they're like in really terrible shape, and like they had to get rushed to the hospital, all that kind of stuff. That's a different situation. I'm more talking about the situation where you're in a crash, and it could be a severe crash, might be a minor crash, but they kind of feel something, but they kind of feel okay as well. Mm-hmm. like, where should they start? So, I mean, and I'm not saying that people should, rush off to the hospital. I'm not saying they should rush off to see you or anywhere. Like, where should they, what should they start doing if they start to feel a little something?
Yeah. I think number one, if we're talking, so obviously it's a spectrum, right? So the people that got rushed with the ambulance to the hospital and spend days in the hospital is maybe the furthest end of the spectrum, right? And then the earliest is, hey, I got into a accident. Both of the cars drove away. I went to work. I went back home, and I think I'm okay, right? But what could I do for myself? So this is not involving any professionals. I think it's really important. First off, there's this. The old school thought is to not move and apply like ice, right? That's like kind of the old thought of ankle sprains, for example. Oh yeah, get off your feet and ice it. And what we've learned in the last like 15 to 20 years is that's probably the worst approach. Like bed rest and icing is probably the worst approach. So maintaining movement is probably the best thing you can do. So if you're like, is something wrong, blah, blah, the best thing you could do is probably walk around. I mean, I'm saying like walk at the speed you would walk a dog. We're not talking like speed walking, but just walk a couple blocks, move, do the normal things you do in a normal day, like do your laundry, unload the dishwasher, take the groceries in. And we can use that either that movement helps improve things. So some of the aches and pains may go away just because you're moving. But also what it'll help you do is kind of reveal like, hey, that was weird. When I bent down to get the dishes out of the back of the dishwasher, I felt something. But the worst thing you could do is sit on the couch and say, I'm just going to wait for a few days and not do anything. I would say also, if you don't have significant pain and you think you feel something, I personally, if it was me, I wouldn't take any meds. I wouldn't take Advil or aspirin or Tylenol.
Why is that though? I'm curious. What is it?
Because early on, I wouldn't want to mask anything. So I know from all our diagnostic testing that low level things that become big things later are hard to tease out sometimes. And if you mask them by taking a little bit of anti-inflammatory or Tylenol, what you're admitting by taking the pills is I'm not 100%. Because if you're 100%, you don't take meds, right? Like you only take those when you're not 100%. But if you so you don't take those, you want whatever it is to show its head. You want to know what's going on, so that if you do get professional help, go to a chiropractor or physical therapist or even urgent care, whatever, that you can point to what it is or you can describe it. Because they're going to ask you questions. Tyson, what is the pain like? You're like, I don't know. It went away. Why did it go away? Well, I took a bunch of pills last night and I feel pretty good now, But that doesn't mean that you're okay. So we want to let those things develop. Now, obviously, if you're dying in pain, you can't sleep, like take meds. I understand that. But if in my perfect world, I would keep moving and I wouldn't take anything for the pain unless it was affecting my ability probably to sleep.
What I see most common is I actually see the opposite of what you're saying people should do. I see people, like a mom that has to take care of their kids and has to get their kids to school. So they pop some ibuprofen or a construction worker where he's got to get to work, so he pops Tylenols and he kind of toughs through it. Yeah. So what you're saying is you probably shouldn't do that because it masks the.
Let me do it a different way. Like I get all these golfers. I work with a lot of golfers, right? And this is a very common thing. I got this like 68-year-old golfer came in the other day and I said, do you have any back pain with golf? Not most of the time. Okay. And he's like, yeah, I mean, I figured out if I do 45 minutes of foam rolling and then I do a 15-minute stretch routine, I take 2 Advil and I get on the cardio bike for half an hour, I don't have any pain. I'm like, well, you just said you basically have pain unless you do some 2 hours of heroic actions to say. So if I said to you, Tyson, does this person have an injury because they can't just play golf? They need to do 2 hours of warm up. I think it would just follow logic that, you know what? That's right. Like this person, they're not 100%, It's the same with like old cars. You remember in old cars, oh yeah, it runs fine. You just have to warm it up for half an hour. It's like, okay, it doesn't run fine.
So we do have a question really quick, and I'm going to interrupt you throughout this.
Yeah, that's great.
I'm going to put it up here, and you're going to hear me kind of typing and looking around. And so I'll interrupt with some questions. And if you do have any questions, post them in the comments, and I can actually put them on the screen for you. So if you're watching via Facebook right now, go ahead and put your questions in the comments. I'll throw them up. You can also text them, and the text line. Let me remove this for a second. It's 314-668-2001. and I'll get those. That's more of an anonymous way of submitting your questions. But this
Cool.
one is, and it's a little bit off topic, but I do want to ask you, can chiropractors help kids?
Yeah, I would say yes. So kids is a kind of a broad definition, right? Because as you know, there's some, in my neighborhood, there's this elite basketball academy, and there's some 14-year-olds walking around my neighborhood that are men. Like I don't want to mess with them. They're like 7 foot tall, 6'8". I mean, these guys are huge, and they're 14, 15, 16. They look like men. So, those adolescent things often have the bodies of the adults. But if we go in like 8-year-olds, or I know you have some young kids, right?
Yeah, 10 today. One Jackson's 10 today.
Yeah.
6 and 4.
Okay, cool. So, 4 is a little younger. I've never treated a 4-year-old. I've treated a 6-year-old before. But the good news is that one thing that kids typically have is they have great range of motion, huge ranges of motion, right? They can use all their joints. They haven't spent 20 years of college, law school, and working behind a desk, or gone to chiropractic and all this.
Doing this for 8 hours a day.
Exactly. Yeah. And they should have a big range of motion. And if they don't, or if they lose it, that's definitely a good reason to go to a chiropractor. Now, I think in all forms of medicine, there's always a pediatric version of it. There are chiropractors that specialize in pediatrics, just like there's pediatric cardiologists and, pediatric lung specialists. So finding those people is important. But, in the world of sports, those kids are growing and developing, and any little ripple in their development can unfortunately have bigger effects long term, and so I think, chiropractors certainly can help kids. And the other good news is, like, when we say that, if Tyson hurts his shoulder and his 6-year-old hurts their shoulder exactly the same way, exactly the same amount, Tyson will probably take 2 to 4 times as much treatment. I mean, because kids are so active and their body's incredibly resilient. And as in your 20s, you just go to sleep, you wake up 50% better the next day anyways, and as we age, we kind of lose that. So I think it's very appropriate for kids, and it's totally safe.
Okay. So we're talking about the things that people can do to see if maybe just kind of test it out to see if they're more injured. And the first thing you just make sure you don't mask it. And I want to ask you something that I used to do when I'd play basketball, and then sometimes I have an issue with my hips where they get out of alignment and then everything gets whack. And I would go and I'd put myself on the inversion table for an hour and just kind of stretch it out. And sometimes it would work, sometimes it wouldn't. Yeah. I mean, like, are things like that okay? Like for example, is it okay for someone to come and like pop your back and do things like that? You know what I'm talking about, where they kind of lift you up? I know that you're probably like, oh my God, don't do that. But so like, are things like that okay?
Yeah. So for the most part, my perspective, and not every chiropractor shares the same perspective, just like there's different perspectives in law, right? My perspective is the body is resilient. It is. And if you set it up right, it'll improve. And typically, if we think about, there's 2 types of joints in the body. There are joints or areas that need to be very strong and stable. We don't want them moving a lot. And there's joints that need to move a lot, right? So like Tyson, your shoulder joint, your what's called your GH joint, or your glenohumeral joint's the most mobile joint in your body. We want that thing to move. So if your friend came up and helped you stretch your shoulder, totally appropriate. Okay. And probably could make you feel better. You get a massage, where they move your shoulder around as they're rubbing your back. That's great. But the flip side is there's other areas that it's dangerous to move. So one of those, like our low back, our lumbar spine, or the low part of your neck, we want it to be relatively stable. We don't want a lot of movement. So if I came up in the middle of a massage and, like I'm cranking your arm, that's fine. But if I grab your head and I start cranking on it, I don't think that's fine. And I think inherently most people know that. They're like, this area shouldn't move. So you do have to be careful. And if your buddy like comes up to you and like gives you the bear hug and cracks your back, that middle part of your back called your thoracic spine, it's meant to move, and it's okay to do that. And that's probably one of the reasons why it also cracks when your friend grabs you versus, if your buddy grabbed your lumbar spine, it would probably feel weird and take a lot of force to get it to move.
All right. So let's move this on a little bit more. Let's say that, someone's in a crash. They think that they kind of feel fine, but they've got this little nagging thing. We're talking about the shoulder. Let's say they've got something that's a nagging, just kind of maybe it's catching, or maybe just a little bit of pain. How long should they go before they say, you know what, enough's enough, I need to go get checked out?
Yeah. So just so that everybody knows, not everything will show up the first day, because sometimes the reason that nagging or catching occurs is because there's what we call a micro injury, but there's a micro injury that's swelling up, taking up space. And after a while, it finally takes up enough space. That process can take up to 5 days, but usually by day 3, you kind of know it. And so, you might not feel anything on day 1. And plus, you might be distracted about your body because your car's damaged or you got to pick your kids up or whatever. So
it's kind of like where, you fall and then you're like, you feel fine. And then the next day you wake up, you're like, oh my gosh, is that what you're talking about? Yeah. Okay.
Perfect example. Or you go to the gym. That's a perfect example of a micro injury in a muscle. You're going to the gym and lifting weights because you want to break them down a little bit so that they grow back stronger. And as you know, when you leave the gym, rarely are you sore. But the next day or even 2 days later, you wake up like, oh my God, I can't move. That's exactly what we're talking about. And that's totally, by the way, that's not the end of the world. Like, our bodies are meant to do that, but I think it's a good sense. But then the other thing, Tyson, I think you want to do, especially with big joints that are supposed to move, is sometimes it's important to separate pain from function. Because one of the markers of pain is decreased function. But I'll tell you, I get a lot of patients that tell me like, oh yeah, we fix them in the office and they're like, I'm 100% pain-free. But if you have no shoulder pain, Tyson, but you can only get your arm up this high, that's a problem, right? Like, the function hasn't returned. So I think after an accident, it's probably important to track both, do I have pain, and how has my function been affected?
I mean, I think those are great. I'm glad you pointed those out. Let's say that they go to the point where, like, you know what, I got to get checked out by a doctor. Mm-hmm. What are some of those diagnostic tests that people can, or doctors can do to help figure out what's going on? Let's use the thoracic area of your spine. Yeah. Let's say you're having some issues there. Let's use that. Let's say I'll give you some symptoms. I'll actually use lumbar. Let's say it hurts whenever I bend over, and I've just got some pain that just won't go away. What in that situation? What are some typical tests that they can do?
Yeah. I found, just going back to your question about like if they do have a little bit of catch or whatever, I've found that most people can tell if I ask them, is that pain or is that just soreness? You go, it's just a stretch. It's what. But if somebody looks at you and goes, is that pain? And you go, you know what it is? That's fine. That's perfectly good reason to get evaluated if it just doesn't feel right to you. And for me, before I have pain, I get this, because I've had a previous back injury, I get this hesitation, like this fear. I don't want to bend over and I keep putting a hand on a wall, or like I support myself on my legs. And that's my first sign that, hey, I'm just avoiding a painful situation. But then if you do go in, you want to get evaluated. So there's a lot of parts of that. So first off is a common one is range of motion. We know pretty much how a lumbar spine should move. You should be able to bend forward. You should be able to bend backwards. You should be able to turn to the right, turn to the left, and then lean to the right and lean to the left. And, if you dropped your pen behind you, you would do a combination of those things to pick it up, right? And what we do in the office is we just break those into the solo movements so that we can just evaluate them well. One thing we're looking for is big difference. Like, wow, Tyson can turn 20 degrees to the right, but he can only turn 5 degrees to the left. That could be a sign of a problem. Once we've done that, sometimes then we go to what are called orthopedic tests, where we know certain movements of the spine should create certain feelings. And if we suspect an injury, so there's some joints in the back called the facet joints. And the facet joints are well evaluated with a test named after a guy who did a bunch of research on the facet joints called Dr. Kemp. So it's called Kemp's test. And Kemp's test basically jams those together. And then we ask you, do you have pain? And either yes or no. And if you say yes, a good doctor will say, like, describe it or tell me what you feel. Sometimes people feel numbness. Sometimes they feel a toothache. Sometimes there's a click in it. And then we go, oh, there might be a fracture there. So that's a common way to do it. And there's, I don't know, you in your career, you've probably seen hundreds of orthopedic tests, right? I mean, there's so many that it's hard to track anymore. And then we can also do things to check the nerves. And if you have any suspicion you have a nerve issue, I would say like that's what we call a red flag. That's a reason to get evaluated. And it's really important. So if you have numbness, tingling, a common one I hear that I was never taught in school, but I hear patients say all the time is like, if they're taking a shower, they'll say the water feels different in this area on my leg. And I think what that is temperature loss is a very common sign of neurological issue. So after your accident, if you feel like, oh, that's weird, I can't, when I rub a towel on when I'm drying off in the shower, it feels different on this side versus the other side, I would say definitely get evaluated, because nerve issues, those can become huge deals, and we want to definitely check those out.
We've had people call us, weeks and sometimes months after the fact. And like, you know what? This numbness just won't go away. I'm like, oh no, you go to a doctor right away.
Yeah.
The doctor? No, you need to go to the doctor right away.
Yeah. Just so everybody knows, one of the reasons that's so important, I don't want to like make this sound like that if you get in a car accident, you're going to have this horrible nerve pain. Most people don't, but it's so important because, one of the things when you do have numbness, true numbness, you don't realize when you get other injuries. So like your skin might get cut, or you might get burned or something like that. And you don't realize it because there's no pain, because those nerves are so affected, and it gets infected. That's problematic. And unfortunately, some people have to get like a finger amputated or a toe amputated because of that. I had one patient who had numbness in her pinky toe, and she ended up in the middle of the night kicking her bedpost, which should have hurt. And she said, it wasn't too bad. Well, 3 days later, her foot looks like it's like decomposing, like her nail bed got infected, it got septic, and it was really bad news, and she had to get a pretty aggressive surgery. And I just felt bad for her, because like if the numbness hadn't been there, she would have gone to the doctor right away, because it was a pretty aggressive little smash of her nail bed.
That's incredible. Incredible. So let's say that you do some of these diagnostic tests in the office, but let's say you just can't quite figure out, you can't pinpoint exactly what it is.
Yeah.
What's some imaging that you can have send the patient out for to have them figure out what's going on?
Yeah, imaging is funny, because the best images typically are from an MRI for the type of injury you get in a car accident. But the medical profession, or the medical model that we have in the US, is not perfect. I think it's great, but it's not perfect. And so one thing that we do before most MRIs is we get an X-ray, right? And really that came out of, once we had health insurance, X-rays are about the 10th of the cost of an MRI. So they're just like, do that first. And then I'll let the insurance companies are like, I'll let you know if you can do an MRI. But, going back to those, like if somebody has neurological signs, like they have numbness or tingling, and they said it started right after the accident, or 2 hours after the accident, that's a perfect reason to get an MRI almost immediately. And so, there's really no reason to do an X-ray before that MRI if you can just have access to one. And one of the great things on lean is a lot of companies on a medical lean will say, like, we'll do it because you have the signs for it right away, because we know we're going to get paid for it. Versus like when you deal with insurance, like, okay, we'll do an X-ray, wait 6 weeks, and then we'll do an MRI. That in the legal world, that doesn't always exist, which is a good news, because we can get a lot of testing a lot faster. But one of the limitations of X-ray is just X-rays, the little rays that shoot through the air, only get stopped by bone. And so it only really helps us see bony structures. I know, you've seen a lot of clients with like disc bulges and disc herniations. Those things will not show up on an X-ray. We can make some guesses at them, because like we see, oh, this joint isn't aligned anymore, or there's a loss of height or space in here, but we really can't visualize that well. So X-rays really only show us bony structures and sometimes joint alignment. So we can do that. Then we move to MRI, and MRI is really good.
And real quick, I just want to add, I can't tell you how many clients have come to us and say, well, they did an X-ray at the hospital and it came back negative. And I'd say it's probably 90% of the time, right? Yeah. And then when they're still in the pain, then they're like, they get referred out for the MRI, which I'm gonna let you get to in a second. And then they're like, oh my gosh, there's something seriously wrong with you. Yeah. And that's the major difference between the X-ray and the MRI. The MRI finds so much more than what an X-ray does. So talk about MRIs, because I definitely want to hear about that. And then if you will also throw in the difference between an MRI and a CT, I think that will also be helpful.
Yeah. So an MRI is really good at evaluating what we call the soft tissue structures, the soft structures of the body. And those are the ligaments, tendons, the disc material, because discs in your low back are really made out of the same material that like ligaments are made out of. So if you've ever had a friend who blew their ACL, or maybe somebody watching this has blown their ACL in their knee, they do a MRI of that knee because the ACL it stands for anterior cruciate ligament. It's a ligament, and we want to see what it looks like. An X-ray won't show us anything about an ACL, right? And in the low back, an X-ray will show us the bony structure, but won't show us the disc herniations. And yeah, you're right. You will see a lot of times you get that MRI, and you'll see a whole lot more structures that are being evaluated because we see those soft tissues. There's also some ligaments. I don't know if you've ever seen like facet hypertrophy in an MRI, ligamentum flavum thickening. These are all very technical medical words, but they're all structures we can only see on MRI. And let me just bring this up for anybody. I've had an MRI and I'm claustrophobic. MRIs, I don't know if you've had one, Tyson, but
no.
They can make you claustrophobic. You have to literally go in a tube because what the M stands for is magnetic resonance imaging. So there's a big magnet that has to spin around you. So if you know you're claustrophobic, I'll just tell you, when you schedule an appointment, tell them, hey, I'm claustrophobic. And Tyson, you should ask everybody that you know is going to get an MRI because they'll give you some sedation. They'll just give you a little bit of medication that makes you feel relaxed. And I'm telling you, you've met me. I'm a big dude. I filled up that MRI tube. I was ready to go full Incredible Hulk and start tearing that thing apart. I was so claustrophobic, and it took everything I had to like breathe through it.
I'll add quick. Now, there is a huge difference between some machines. From one machine to the next, they can get much better images.
Yeah,
and I don't think that these are as good. But if you're really, really bad, there's also open MRIs that will help with that claustrophobia.
Yeah. I would say, like, as a professional, I would much rather prefer that you got some sedation and a high, like what you're talking about, a 3 Tesla MRI. And what Tyson's talking about is early on, MRI machines their strength is measured in Tesla, which is just a measure of the power of the magnet. And every time it went up from 1 Tesla to 1.5 to 3, there's some 10 Tesla things out there for neurological conditions. It would just be like how good your phone on your cell phone camera or your cell phone camera became, right? Like early on, it was like grainy, and now that thing's getting better images than anything. These 3 Tesla and above magnets are producing super crisp, very good images, which is what we want for diagnostics. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yep.
By the way, one thing about X-ray is it does expose you to some radiation. Same thing with CT. Like there is radiation involved. It's usually not that much, but it's certainly, you want to make sure that the risk of the radiation outweighs like what the information we're going to get. But the cool thing about MRIs is it's just a magnet. There's no radiation at all. So that you could literally have an MRI of your body every day and there'd be no risk to it. They're just expensive and they're claustrophobic. Yeah.
They really are expensive. For those of you that don't have health insurance, there are workarounds when it comes to MRIs. Even though, let's say that they might bill the hospital, or not the hospital, the health insurance, like $5,000 for the MRI.
Yeah.
Gigantic self-pay discounts, like $500, $750, still not cheap. Like an X-ray, $30, something like that. But it is more. But you do get the comfort of knowing exactly what's wrong with you, and that's the reason that you might want to get on.
Yeah, and let me just bring up a point here, because again, like medicine, more studies have been done. I think they say like more studies have been done in the last 15 years of medicine than in the 100 years before that, right?
Wow.
Just because we know what we're doing now, and with the advent of very fast computers, because an MRI, as you know, it takes slices, and every one of those slices can be, how do I say this? It takes a slice every 2 millimeters. Okay, so to put this in perspective, think about how tall your neck is, Tyson. And for ease of this, we'll just say it's 10 inches tall, right? We can take a slice every 2 millimeters. Now, a millimeter is roughly the thickness of a credit card. So just think how many credit cards you could stack up in a 10-inch neck. And for every 2 credit cards, we take a slice. So we can get great images of all the nerves and all the little structures in your body. And you're right, you can see a lot of stuff. So because of that, and we now have computers that can evaluate those things, there's some awesome things that go on. The other thing is we also realize that if you get an MRI, we have, just because there's a finding on the MRI, that doesn't necessarily mean that's causing pain. And I'll go back to, there's a famous orthopedic surgeon who says, if you want to find a reason to do surgery on a professional athlete, just throw them in an MRI tube, right? Like we all have wear and tear, and that's perfectly fine. But the reason you work with somebody like Tyson or somebody like me is we know the people that can look at that and go, hey, there is some wear and tear here, but there's also this other big problem, and that's what we need to see. And a good radiologist can tell you that problem is old and this problem is new, right? And it's no different than like in your car. Your car may have some damage, might have some scratches or dents, but we know what's new from an accident, right? How do we can tell that? Well, the old stuff probably has rust or peeling paint and stuff like that around it. And your joints in your body, especially if you have had a lot of birthdays, like over 50 birthdays, there's probably more stuff on your MRI. And we have to balance like what of this correlates with your pain and what of this is just, hey, if you like Tyson, if you played baseball, if I looked at your throwing arm, it probably has a little bit of wear and tear on it. But maybe you're like, hey, I've never had any problems with my spine. And I go, oh, well, and you said that this thing happened 4 days ago, and I can see all this swelling in here with the MRI, things like that. So it takes skill to look at those. You need a professional.
Yeah, that's where those hip problems came in. It's from the baseball. So that's where it comes from.
And going back to CT, by the way, you asked about CT. So,
yeah. I'm glad you're.
Yeah, CT is computed tomography, and this used to be called a CAT scan. They've gotten away from that, but if anybody ever, in the movies, like, oh, I got my CAT scan.
Everybody still calls it a CAT scan. Everybody does.
Yeah. Okay. But if you see just CT or what do they call it again? There's another term that they're starting to use for it. But anyways, what a CT is like is a bunch of very accurate thin sliced x-rays from a bunch of different angles. So instead of just taking front and side view, we move this thing around you. And if you, again, going to the dentist, they take like x-rays from all different angles, multiply that by 100, and that's kind of what a CT does. Now, the good news of it is we can visualize things of different densities in our body. So think about like your nose has a certain density, right? Your earlobe is a different density. And with CT, we can kind of make out those differences. For me personally, I just had a CT 2 weeks ago, and they, by chance, found a nodule in my lower lung, like a 1 centimeter nodule. Most likely it's benign, but the reason they were able to find it is your lungs have a certain density, right? It's kind of a sponginess. And this thing was like a marble in there, had a much denser density to it, or harder. And so they're able to pick that out. If you think about an injury, like after an accident, like sometimes you get a lot of swelling. Well, swelling is like filling up a sponge with water. It gets real gushy, and we can tell those things with the right imaging.
I love it. So I'm not going to get into the effectiveness of chiropractic care because it's proven to be effective, but and we're going to talk about that in another show too. I'm going to bring you on to talk about the effectiveness of chiropractic care. Because I think it's interesting because sometimes we do get resistance to it. And sometimes we have people that just say, I'm not going to chiropractor. I'm like, no one's going to make you go to a chiropractor. That's not what we do. But what are some other options? So let's say that they're still in some pain. They need to see someone. What do you recommend that they do?
I would say, so I've been involved in some different legal cases, and I would say that the only factor I care about is anybody who can help you get back to function. Anybody that can make you feel better is great. Just make sure they take notes on what they're doing, because if they don't, a guy like Tyson has a tough time doing anything for you, So like I work with a local massage therapist. She's excellent about taking notes, and she's amazing. And some people just feel way more comfortable with her. And for some people, that's the right treatment, is get a few massages. It usually takes a few, and describe what's going on. So I think massage is a good option for people. Plus, a guy like you, if I just lock you in a dark room and play Enya for an hour, you get out of 30% of any pain you have, right?
Yeah, but, production, man. That's part of that is part of this too, though. That's true. Right.
You're totally jacked up. Yeah. So I think acupuncture is another good option for a lot of people. I don't know what it is about acupuncture, Tyson. I've sent hundreds of patients to acupuncture. 30% of them tell me it made no effect. Not good, not bad. 50% of them say it was amazing. And then there's these other people just going, I'll just go to you. I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's like you have to be, like at one with your chakras or something, but like, For some people, they just can't tell the difference, and others like swear by it, right? I think acupuncture is awesome. I've used it myself. Physical therapy, currently the way that physical therapists practice and chiropractors practice, man, it's getting real close to perfectly over. We look at bones, joints, and muscles and tendons. We know how to evaluate nervous systems. We're ordering MRIs and x-rays from the same buildings and the same radiologists reading them. And now we're rehabbing, we're doing exercise, right? And it's getting harder and harder to tell the difference between those. Like if I just brought chiropractic notes and PT notes to you and I took off the name, I don't know if you could tell anymore, right?
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I have definitely noticed over the last 10 years that complete overlap where a lot of the chiropractors are doing just what the physical therapists are doing, which 10 years ago, you'd have a chiropractor and a physical therapist. You'd have them both on the exact same case, and the exact same patient. Yeah. So, client would go to chiropractor on Monday, and then on Tuesday they go to physical therapy, and then they'd go see an ortho on Wednesday or something. It was just kind of nuts when the chiropractors can do the exact same things, or they can actually do more in a lot of cases than the physical therapist can do. Yeah.
And I think that the advantage of all those people I talked about, really those four seem to, athletic trainers sometimes work in PT offices too, ATCs. Those people really, I would say, are specialists in the musculoskeletal system, knowing what the function is and all that. But make sure, I think it's really important, going back to this PT chiro thing, make sure that whoever you're going to is giving you exercises and movements to do afterwards. Because if you don't, we don't really know if you're better. Again, going back to that, you could be pain-free, but if you don't have the ability to move, it's problematic. So making sure that, like they give you exercises. And what we find is, the reason that you're getting that overlay of PTs and chiros, PTs for a long time did great rehab, but really didn't have that great a skill with their hands-on care, like what you would call an adjustment or mobilization or stretching. And then they said, well, why not? Let's expand our scope. Let's learn that stuff. And chiros got all up in arms like, oh my God, they're taking our job. But along the way, the chiros are like, hey man, I can mobilize and stretch people, but it doesn't seem to stick. And it's like, oh yeah, it's because you're not doing the rehab exercises. And we were like, maybe we should learn those rehab exercises. And so we started learning that, and PTs are like, oh, they're taking our job. And in the end, I always say, like, if I can walk into your clinic and know what your license is, you're not that good. I shouldn't be able to tell. You should just look like the greatest PT when you're doing rehab and the greatest chiropractor when you're doing hands-on care. And in some places, if you can do dry needling, the greatest acupuncturist, right? Like put needles in the right places for the right reasons. And that's where the best in the professions are going.
I like that. Let me start by saying this. If you choose to not get any treatment and you were in a car crash and you think you have an injury case, you're not going to get much, if anything. So I'll start with that caveat.
Okay.
But John, let's say that someone says, you know what, I'm going to tough it out. I don't want to go to a doctor. I don't want to go to PT. I don't want to do anything. I just kind of want to tough it out at home. What are some things people can do at home to get them through this pain period?
Complain to your spouse or partner.
It's a tough question because you don't know like what's wrong with them. But let's say they're just going to tough it out. Let's get what if, and I don't recommend it, but let's say they do. So what are some
number one? Complain to your spouse or partner.
Okay. Yeah, good luck with that.
Number two, when they get bored, find your best friend, call him or her and complain to them. And then when everybody gets on your case about stop complaining and do something about it, go get evaluated. That's the best situation. But I'll go back to what I said early on. The best thing everybody can do is really movement. I'll tell you the worst things to do. Here are the worst things in order. Number one, do not, under any circumstances, please, I beg you, get into a jacuzzi or a hot tub.
Oh, I'm actually really surprised by this.
Yeah. Okay. I will tell you what I hear from more people. I have had hundreds of patients that tell me, I kind of felt something. So we have a hot tub. So I decided to hop in, and man, I felt so good in that hot tub. It all went away. I could totally move. And I said, how was it 2 hours later? Oh, I couldn't move. I was on the floor. I was writhing in pain. I don't know what it is, Tyson. I have no physiological explanation for it, but so many people tell me that I got into a hot tub and I felt great. And 2 hours later, I was horrible. And it's like, I don't know if it increases joint swelling or if it takes the things that might be having those micro injuries and really expands them. But man, I've heard so many people tell me that they felt horrible. Next up, super hot, sustained showers. It's okay to warm up and like get a nice warm shower, but I'm saying like Oh, I turned it all the way to hot. It was burning my skin. I stood there for 20 minutes. I've heard this so many times. Again, if we say, how were you later? How were you the next day? The response is almost always, actually, I was a little worse now I think about it. It didn't help me at all. Heat is good 20% of the time, 25% of the time, which means it's not 75% of the time. The problem is, do you really want to flip that coin, and decide or roll that dice that, you might be the guy that it didn't work for? Because you're going to roll snake eyes 3 out of 4 times, right? Next up, people that either foam roll, you know what a foam roller is, right?
That one, yeah.
Yeah. They either foam roll or they get a stick, the stick, which is like a self-massage tool, and they tell me, oh yeah, it really hurts, so I dug into that area. And I think
somewhere around here. Hold on. Keep talking.
Obviously you use it all the time if you can't find it, pal.
Exactly.
The janitor threw it out, got it off the floor like 4 weeks ago. No, right. But they I dug in there or I pushed really hard. If you have a bruise, let's go to your ACL. Like if you tear your ACL and it's sore, if I came up to you and like, oh, Tyson, let me do you a favor and just jam my thumb into that area, you'd be like, you're out of your mind. But for our spines, I don't know why people do it, but they're like, oh, it really hurt here. What'd you do? Oh, I rubbed on it for 20 minutes with my thumb. Then I took my wife's rolling pin and I jammed that in there. And man, I kind of think it was loosening up. So then I got I used the corner of my counter and, rubbed on it. I've heard all those things. And I'm like, do you go up to your kids when they have a bruise and dig into it and tell them it hurt? How about now? It's just a ridiculous thing. But for our spines, some reason we think that they're different than everywhere else.
That is the craziest thing. I will say this. I had, it was John Fisher's first mastermind.
Yeah.
I get off the plane and I was feeling fine to get on the plane. I get off the plane in Chicago and I'm actually standing. I stand up and I kind of feel like, oh my gosh, something's going on with my back. And I'm basically walking like half steps off the plane. And I barely make it to the hotel. And I decide.
By the way, when your back hurts, you don't realize how far it is from where the plane lets off to the first bathroom. I mean, it's like 6 miles, it feels like.
I just sit down. I was like, I don't know what's wrong with me. I have no idea what happened here. But so I get to the hotel and I go and get a massage and this guy just and I can barely stand up the next day. It was just awful. It was the worst thing. It over the day, I could actually start to stand up a little bit more, and it was nuts. So I guess getting a massage is not always the best thing, but it can be helpful in some circumstances.
Yeah. One thing about massage, and again, going back, I said there's pain and there's function, and we have to kind of measure those. If there's an area that's tight, what you're looking for, the best results you'll get out of massage typically are an area that's tight but is not painful. So if you go I can't move my neck, but it doesn't hurt, that's a good reason to massage. But if you go, it hurts and I can't move, that's a little bit more dangerous. So, for example, when you're foam rolling, you ever hit your quads and you're like, man, I didn't know they were this tight. They don't hurt ever, but they're super tight. But usually doing that, you're like, that actually feels a whole lot better afterwards. So if you have an area that's painful, I would just tell the massage service, don't touch that area because it really hurts, but around there or above or below that is usually a much safer area.
I love it. All right, let's end it there. Tell people how they can get in touch with you if they want to reach out to you.
Well, if anybody has any questions about this stuff, I'd say talk to Tyson. He knows how to get a hold of me. But I'm out in Nevada, Las Vegas, Nevada, and I have a small clinic called Engage Spine and Joint Center. Engage Spine and Joint Center. And they can check it out there. EngageSpineandJoint.com.
I love it. All right, Josh, thanks so much. Don't go anywhere in the broadcast, but hold tight. Thanks,
all right,
everybody. We'll talk to you next week.